Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The scent of rain-soaked earth and late spring roses always brought Michael to mind. It was a peculiar association, I know, but he'd been a fixture in our lives, in my garden, for nearly 30 years. David, my husband, and Michael. They were a package deal from the moment I met David in that dusty college library, Michael hovering nearby like a lanky, good-natured shadow. Now, all these years later, the shadow had silver at the temples, and a few more lines etched around his kind eyes, but he was still Michael. Steady, dependable, and more often than not, present. Our house, the one David and I had poured our youth into, sanding floors and staining woodwork until our hands were raw, had a wide, welcoming porch. It was our haven, especially on evenings like this, when the day's heat was surrendering to a cooler breeze, and the sky was painted in those soft, bruised colors that promised a peaceful night. I was out there, nursing a lukewarm cup of chamomile tea, the crickets just starting their nightly chorus. David was inside, probably engrossed in one of his historical documentaries. His latest passion involved Roman aqueducts, of all things. The wrought iron gate, the one with the slightly crooked latch that David always swore he'd fix, creaked open. I didn't even need to look up. Michael had a way of moving, a quiet rhythm that was as familiar to me as the ticking of our grandfather clock in the hall. "Evening, Eleanor," he said, his voice a low rumble that always seemed to carry a hint of a smile. He settled into the wicker chair opposite mine, the one that groaned slightly under his weight, a sound as familiar as his greeting. "Michael, didn't hear your car. Parked down the street. Felt like a walk." David busy solving the mysteries of ancient plumbing. I chuckled. "Something like that. He's found a particularly fascinating segment on lead pipes, I believe." Michael grinned, a flash of warmth that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He had such gentle eyes, the color of warm honey. It was one of the first things I'd ever noticed about him, that unwavering kindness in his gaze. For years, I'd seen him as an extension of David, a comfortable piece of our shared life. He was Uncle Michael to our kids when they were little, the one who'd patiently teach them to skip stones or explain the constellations. He was the friend who'd show up with takeout when the flu flattened our household, or help David hoist a new bookshelf into place. But lately, in the quiet moments, when the conversation lulled, or when I'd catch him looking out at the garden with a thoughtful expression, I'd felt a subtle shift. Nothing I could name, just a faint, almost imperceptible change in the air between us. Maybe it was just me, getting older, seeing things that weren't there. 48 years can make you a little too reflective, I suppose. "The roses are looking particularly fine this year, Eleanor," he said, his gaze drifting towards the climbing blaze that cascaded over the trellis near the porch steps. "You've outdone yourself." "They've been cooperative," I replied, my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup. "A little bit of luck with the weather, I think." We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, a silence forged over decades of shared experiences, triumphs, and the quiet, ordinary days in between. It was a silence I cherished, usually. But tonight, it felt different, charged. I could feel a restlessness emanating from Michael, a subtle tension in the way he held his hands, his fingers drumming lightly on the armrest. He cleared his throat. "Actually, Eleanor, I was hoping to catch you alone. There's something I've been wanting to talk to you about. If you have a moment." My heart gave a little flutter, an unexpected bird taking flight in my chest. It wasn't alarm, not exactly. It was more anticipation, a sense that the familiar landscape of our friendship was about to encounter an unexpected tremor. David was inside, cocooned in his Roman world. The crickets sang. The air was soft and damp. "Of course, Michael," I said, trying to keep my voice even calm. "I have all the time in the world." I gestured vaguely towards the house. "David will be lost to history for at least another hour." He looked at me then, a direct, searching look that seemed to bypass all the years of casual familiarity and peer straight into some deeper part of me. His usual easy smile was absent, replaced by an earnestness that made my breath catch. The lines around his eyes seemed more pronounced, his expression vulnerable, almost boyish, despite the silver in his hair. "It's important," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if the words themselves were heavy. "And it's probably long overdue." The roses, vibrant and full, seemed to hold their breath. The scent of them, usually so comforting, now felt heavy, laden with unspoken things. My teacup had grown cold in my hands. I set it down on the small weathered table between us, the clink of ceramic on wood sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. I looked at this man, my husband's best friend, a man I thought I knew as well as I knew myself, and realized with a sudden jolt that perhaps I didn't know him at all. Not in the way that truly mattered. The ordinary porch, the fading light, the gentle hum of the evening. It all felt as though it was on the precipice of something new, something that might just change the familiar contours of our lives. "All right, Michael," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I'm listening." He took a deep breath, his gaze dropping to his hands, which were now clasped tightly in his lap. The usual ease in his posture was gone, replaced by a tautness, a kind of coiled energy. He looked up again, and this time there was a sheen in his honey-colored eyes that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. It was something more complex, a raw emotion that made my own heart ache in response, though I didn't yet know why. "Eleanor," he began, his voice low and a little shaky. "This isn't easy to say, and I need you to know, before I say anything else, that my friendship with David, it's one of the most important things in my life. You both are." I nodded slowly, a knot forming in my stomach. The gentle cadence of his words, the careful way he was choosing them, told me this wasn't a casual confession of some minor transgression or a request for advice on a new hobby. This was something else entirely. The air thickened, the scent of roses and damp earth becoming almost overwhelmingly potent, as if the world itself was leaning in to hear what he had to say. The crickets chirped on, oblivious, but in the small space between our wicker chairs, a profound quiet had fallen, a space where only his next words could exist. I waited, my breath held, a strange mix of apprehension and an inexplicable, burgeoning tenderness filling me. The last sliver of the setting sun caught the silver in his hair, turning it to a brief halo, and for a fleeting second he looked like a stranger, a man on the verge of revealing a hidden landscape I'd never known was there, right beside me, all these years. He finally met my eyes again, and the vulnerability there was startling, disarming. "For a long time now," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I've felt something for you, Eleanor. Something more than just friendship." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The chirping of the crickets faded to a dull buzz, the scent of roses suddenly cloying. My husband's best friend, Michael. He was looking at me with an expression that I'd never seen on his face before, an expression of profound, yearning affection, mixed with a deep, almost painful honesty. My mind raced, trying to process his words, trying to fit them into the neat, orderly framework of the life I knew. David was inside, watching his documentaries. Our children were grown, forging their own paths. And here, on our familiar porch, under the gathering dusk, Michael was laying bare a piece of his heart that I never suspected existed. "Michael." I started, but my voice trailed off. What could I say? The surprise was a physical thing, a wave that washed over me, leaving me breathless. It wasn't an unwelcome revelation, not entirely, which was perhaps the most shocking part. There was no revulsion, no immediate anger or indignation. Instead, a strange, deep echo resonated within me, a sense of something recognized, something that perhaps, in the hidden corners of my own heart, I had felt too, but had never dared to name. He didn't look away. His gaze held mine, steady and unwavering, despite the tremor I could now see in his hands. I know this is a shock, Eleanor. Believe me, I've debated with myself 1,000 times whether I should ever say this. For years, I've kept it buried. For David's sake, for your sake, for the sake of the easy, comfortable world we all shared. He paused, a faint, rueful smile touching his lips. But I'm not getting any younger, Eleanor. And some things just demand to be spoken. Not because I expect anything to change, not in the way you might think, but because living with this silence, this unspoken truth, has become too heavy. His words hung in the air, potent and transformative. The familiar porch, the fading light, the scent of my roses, everything seemed to be cast in a new, sharper relief. He wasn't asking for an affair, not proposing some dramatic upheaval. It was a confession of the heart, pure and simple, yet infinitely complex in its implications. He was offering a truth, a vulnerable piece of himself, and in doing so, he was changing the very fabric of our shared history, or at least my understanding of it. The subtle tension I'd felt in him earlier, the restlessness, it all clicked into place. This was the source. This deep, long-held secret. I thought of David, my husband, my partner for so many years. Our life together, the tapestry woven with shared dreams, routines, and the comfortable threads of companionship. This confession wasn't about betraying that. Michael's tone made that clear. It felt more like an unveiling, a revelation of an emotional undercurrent that had been flowing silently beneath the surface of our everyday lives. My own emotions were a whirlwind. Surprise, yes, but also a strange sense of validation. Had I sensed this? Had some part of me known on an intuitive level that Michael's affection for me, his attentiveness, his quiet presence, held a different quality? Perhaps. Or perhaps I was just now, in the light of his words, reinterpreting decades of small moments, shared glances, quiet conversations. I value you, Eleanor, he continued, his voice gaining a little more strength, a little more steadiness. I value your kindness, your intelligence, your laughter, the way you see the world. Over the years, watching you, being around you, it's been one of the quiet joys of my life, and a quiet sorrow, too, knowing that the boundaries of our relationship were so clearly defined by my friendship with David and your marriage to him. He wasn't trying to flatter me. His words felt genuine, raw, stripped of any artifice. It was the confession of a man who had loved quietly, respectfully, from a distance, for a very long time. And the changed everything wasn't about a future action, but about the now altered perception of the past and present. The knowledge of this unexpressed depth of feeling from him, it was like discovering a hidden room in a familiar house. I finally found my voice, though it was shaky. Michael, I don't know what to say. I'm stunned. I know, he said softly. I didn't say it to make you uncomfortable or to put you in a difficult position. I said it because I needed to. For me. And maybe a small part of me hoped that knowing wouldn't be a burden, but perhaps a different kind of connection between us. An honest one. An honest one. The words resonated. How much of our lives were lived around unspoken truths, polite omissions, the careful curation of our outward selves. He was offering a moment of pure, unadulterated honesty, a rare and precious thing. The fear that had initially gripped me began to subside, replaced by a profound sense of something akin to awe. Awe at his courage, and awe at the depth of an emotion I had never guessed at. The porch light flickered on automatically, casting a warm, amber glow over us, pushing back the encroaching darkness. It felt symbolic somehow, as if a light had been switched on in a previously shadowed corner of our lives. Michael looked tired, suddenly, as if the effort of his confession had drained him. But there was also a new lightness in his eyes, the look of a man who had finally unburdened himself of a heavy load. I thought about the implications, about David, about the comfortable equilibrium of our trio. Would this knowledge shatter it? Or could it, as Michael hoped, transform it into something truer, deeper? The path ahead was uncertain, veiled in the twilight, but one thing felt undeniably clear. The ground beneath my feet had shifted. The familiar landscape of my life, the emotional topography I thought I knew so well, had been redrawn by his quiet, heartfelt words. The "you won't believe what happened" wasn't a dramatic event in the traditional sense, but an internal earthquake, a profound realignment of understanding. And the journey of navigating this new terrain was just beginning. I looked at Michael, truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time, not as my husband's best friend, but as a man with his own hidden heart, a heart he had just bravely and unexpectedly laid open to me. And in that moment, under the soft glow of the porch light, I felt an immense wave of empathy and a surprising, quiet sense of gratitude for his trust. The conversation that evening stretched late, long after David had likely traded Roman aqueducts for the land of dreams. We didn't solve anything, not really. There were no grand declarations made, no promises exchanged beyond the implicit promise of continued respect and care. What Michael had offered was a truth, and what I found myself offering in return was an ear willing to listen, and a heart willing to understand, or at least to try. He spoke of moments, small things mostly, over the years. A shared laugh over a badly burnt batch of cookies I'd made for a bake sale, a quiet word of encouragement I'd given him when he was doubting a career change, the way I'd fiercely defended a stray cat David had wanted to shoo away. These were the tiny, seemingly insignificant pebbles that had, for him, built a mountain of affection. It wasn't a litany of romantic pining, but rather an acknowledgement of a deep, resonant connection he'd felt, one that ran parallel to, and was respectful of, my marriage. He emphasized that, his unwavering respect for David and for our life together. He wasn't trying to disrupt it. He was, I came to understand, trying to integrate this long-held part of himself into the open, perhaps to feel whole, to feel truly seen, even if only by me. As he spoke, I found myself re-examining my own memories. Were there times I had sensed something more in his gaze? A lingering touch when he handed me a cup of coffee. A particular warmth in his smile reserved just for me? Maybe. Or maybe it was the power of suggestion, his confession now coloring the past. It didn't really matter. What mattered was the present, this newfound knowledge sitting between us like a fragile, precious object. I never wanted to make you feel watched or uncomfortable, Eleanor, he said, his brow furrowed with concern. If I ever overstepped, even in my own mind, I am truly sorry. No, Michael, I'd assured him, and it was the truth. You've always been a perfect gentleman. Always. Kind. And he had. There was never a moment of impropriety, never a hint of disrespect. If anything, he had always been a steadfast, supportive presence for both of us. Perhaps this deep affection was the very wellspring of that unwavering support. The most surprising thing was my own reaction. After the initial shock, There wasn't turmoil in the way I have expected. There was a quiet sort of unfolding within me, a sense of being seen, understood, in a way I hadn't realized I'd been missing. It wasn't that David didn't love me or appreciate me. He did, in his own steady, quiet way. But David was a man of routine, of comfortable silences, of practicalities. Michael's confession spoke to a different layer of being, the emotional, the intuitive, the unspoken currents that flow beneath the surface of daily life. "What do we do with this, Michael?" I finally asked, the question hanging heavy in the night air, which had grown cooler now, the scent of roses sharper, more defined. He looked out into the darkness of the garden for a long moment before answering. "I don't know, Eleanor. I truly don't. I suppose we just know. And we go on, being friends. Hopefully even better friends, because there's nothing hidden between us anymore, at least not this." He gave a small, hesitant smile. "Maybe knowing this helps you understand me a bit better, too. Why I'm always around, why I care so much about your family, about your happiness." His words were simple, yet they carried an enormous weight of sincerity. He wasn't asking for anything. He was offering an explanation, a piece of his truth. The burden, he had said, was in the silence. And now the silence was broken. As the first hint of dawn began to pale the eastern sky, we had talked that long. A sense of peace settled over me, or at least the beginning of one. It was the peace that comes from confronting a complex truth, from looking it in the eye and not flinching. Michael stood to leave, stretching his stiff limbs. He looked older, yes, but also lighter, as if a physical weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Thank you for listening, Eleanor," he said, his voice raspy from hours of talking. "Thank you for not running screaming into the night." I managed a small smile. "You're too important to us, Michael." "To me, running wouldn't solve anything." I paused, then added, because it felt true, and because he deserved to hear it. "And thank you for your honesty. It takes a great deal of courage to say what you've said." He nodded, his honey-colored eyes, now weary but clear, meeting mine. "You're worth the courage, Eleanor." He left as quietly as he had arrived, the creak of the gate a soft punctuation mark at the end of a profoundly transformative night. I stayed on the porch, watching the sky slowly brighten, the roses beginning to emerge from the shadows, their colors deepening with the growing light. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt different. My husband, David, was asleep inside, unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just occurred on his own front porch. And Michael, his best friend, my friend, was walking away with a lighter heart, having shared a truth that had, indeed, changed everything. Not in a loud, explosive way, but in the quiet, internal way that real change often happens. It changed my perception of the past, it changed the dynamics of the present, and it undoubtedly would shape the future in ways I couldn't yet fathom. The world felt a little wider, a little more complex, and my own heart felt surprisingly open. Open to this new understanding, this unexpected gift of vulnerability from a man I thought I knew, who had just shown me a depth I'd never imagined. And in that moment, I knew that our friendship, whatever it was to become, had just stepped onto more sacred ground.